Welcome back to the Move Better with a Cheer PT podcast. Today I have with me Corey Jung. This is our third conversation it's actually, I think we're beating the year mark because I think it was the end of January that we talked for the first time last year. So just about a year. And we've enjoyed talking with each other so much. We like to talk about sensory involvement and how we can influence how there's a lot of influences to our general movement outside of just moving. Today, we're going to focus our conversation on the maybe 35 to 50-year-old range, because that's more my range, but 35 to 40-year-old range-ish. And if you're a cheer parent or a former cheerleader, this is for you. This is probably more specific to you, but the information that we have will carry over, and that we'll talk about will also carry over into how you influence your kids. So everything we learn, we teach to our children as well. And so thank you for joining me again today, Corey. And tell me what's new in your world as far as movement goes before we jump into talking about client stuff.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Laura. It's always great to get together with you. So what's new?
Yeah.
I'm just really looking more into the whole system, of the human being. Some people refer to it as the human locomotor system. So I'm really looking at not just the static posture that a lot of people think of when they think of posture. And I think maybe in previous episodes, we talked about resting postures. So that is sitting and being in full flexion of the lower body limbs in particular, but also the shapes of human movement, right? The legacy, the movement legacy of our species being upright walking beings. And so the various forms of upright gait, walking, jogging, running, sprinting, hopping, skipping, all those things. And so what you see is that counter rotation is occurring, right?
Yeah.
Most of us walk in a straight line if we're going down the street, right? And so, the lower half of us is rotating, let's just say, to the left, and the upper half of us is rotating more to the right. And so that counter rotation kind of cancels each other out and equates into a straight line. We're the only species that does that. The other ones that do walk upright temporarily, they do a little bit more side to side and not so much rotation. Imagine a penguin, for instance. And so human specific, and how have humans moved upon the earth for about 99% of human history.
Cool.
It's fascinating to me.
Yeah. And probably taking that from how we evolved in evolution and all. That's pretty, imagine that's pretty interesting to learn about as well. We talk about rotation. Like when you watch somebody walk, there's not a ton of thoracic rotation, or upper body rotation, but we need that rotation to like you just said, like it's counter rotation that our body is rotating as we move, but it's not visible necessarily because both sides are kind of working against each other, working with each other. In that
like slings.
Yep.
Yeah. So these slings, they work together, and it's almost, the result is similar to that of a self-winding watch. This perpetual energy, it feeds back into the system, right? So it's very efficient. I mean, when things are working well, right?
Right.
When they're working well.
Yeah. So let's talk about when things aren't working well. When people, they come to see us, or they're trying to move differently and better. Like, how do you dive into do people come to you with complaints of, I'm not moving well, and then they want, you want to move better, or as you're getting stronger, like what's your evaluation process? You're like, check you out and see where we need to go. Like discovery process.
Well, the general
Yeah.
health history questionnaire.
Yeah.
So I look for if they have a yes or a number of yeses. And so, I would ask them about that for sure. But then I also want to just see, like, besides your history, like, how's your current functional state, for instance. So what's the old saying? That often the pain site isn't the pain source.
Right.
And the body is very wise. And so, for instance, if I have a headache, that's not my body telling me, hey, Corey, you have an asprin deficiency. It's telling me, it's like, right?
Right.
Right.
Hopefully not. Yeah.
Hopefully your body's not telling you that, but
Yeah.
it's telling you in most cases that, hey, perhaps you're overstressed, you're underrested, maybe you ate something that you're intolerant to, sensitive to. Maybe the atmosphere, the air in which you're breathing. Like I remember one of our last times, maybe we spoke, maybe late fall or so, and so that's kind of fire season where I am, and so if there's a lot of wood smoke in the area, I'm going to get a headache, for instance, because there's a lot of stuff in the air, perhaps pollutants, toxins, whatnot, and so your body's like, hey, I don't like that, for instance. So our body gives us these signals. It's kind of like a canary in the coal mine, because it's looking out for our best interest, right? And so if I have a complaint of pain, for instance, we talked about these slings and these counter aspects of the body. Was it contralateral, right? Midline or crossing the midline sort of thing. And so you're probably familiar that there's aspects, neurologically speaking, and once again, it's all one body. So my right elbow, neurologically speaking, is related to my left knee, right?
Yep.
You're aware of this.
Yep. So for general people that are not familiar with the term slings, there are fascial slings, there are dynamic body slings that go from head to toe, from left to right, in and around the body. They encompass our organs. They connect us in different patterns, different movement patterns, or different patterns throughout the body that will affect, if you have an injury in one area, or you have something going on, doesn't have to be an injury, but something's going on in one area, it's going to affect that pull through that sling through the rest of the body, and can affect how we move in general.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if someone's coming in and say, hey, this region, this musculoskeletal region is talking to me, maybe it's screaming, right? There's a saying, I believe, within the traditional Chinese medicine community, that if you don't listen to your body's whispers, eventually you'll hear its screams. So pay attention to the body.
Right.
So if they have something going on, so a lot of times I'll be like, okay, but then I also want us to continue the conversation and kind of go throughout the body, and perhaps also within the body, to see how everything else is too. So how's your sleep? How's your stress? How's your digestion? And digestion is everything from mouth all the way down to exit. So, are you experiencing anything 30 minutes, 2 hours or so after eating something? And how is everything when everything exits? And then is everything moving at least once within a 24-hour period? I did have a woman, since we're on this topic right now, I did have a woman years ago who told me that she would make a bowel movement basically once every 2 to 3 weeks.
Wow.
And she was on 17 pharmaceutical prescriptions at the time. And she was in pretty much chronic pain. Her eyes was constantly flicker, just high stress, and just about any position we would get her in, she was uncomfortable. And so, given that scenario, if I'm just focusing on the musculoskeletal system, I'm going to have a hell of a time. I'm going up literally against the tide.
Yeah.
I might not. So like if I have, she said she had to, I'm about 8 hours south of the Portland, Oregon area.
Yeah.
And she would say this, that like, oh, the only time I can have a good movement is when I go see my high colonic person up in Oregon every month or so. So imagine,
right.
so, giving you a little bit of the history,
right,
and some things that we could look at, the low hanging fruit. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, so I think what's important in looking at, like, so someone comes to see me with back pain, from, and they're attributing it to something happened in cheerleading or something happened in their life. They were driving for a long time and their back hurt. There's a lot of factors that can get involved in that, beyond movement, like that, the digestion wise, and how are things moving? Because that's going to affect, one, that can physically affect how the back feels, but two, that's all physical, I guess, but physically as far as like pain symptom wise. But I would also, like we had talked about before, but the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, and how our body regulates, and the hormones, and like all of that can be, if something's off in there, it's going to affect how our bowels move and how our back feels. And if we're under that intense stress, so taking into effect not just the physical end of it, but how all the different pieces come together, and having it hit, like we need the physical history and what you've had for surgery, or what what your previous history was, because that'll feed into it, but also what your body's doing right now, and how is your stress response and your sleep and all of that stuff that goes. It's not just one thing, it's everything put together that affects the slings and affects how we move, and etc.
Right. I mean, the musculoskeletal system, the way I see it, is like in service to these higher order life, these vital organ systems, right? Because the musculoskeletal system can protect its own. It's basically it's out on the periphery. It's a shell of sorts that can protect the organs in that sense, but it's also helping to move you in space to obtain resources to feed the organs. And it can also move you through space from something else that might see you as a resource, right? Because the body, like the 100 trillion or so cells, it's not thinking about, oh, this muscle or this six pack or something like this. It's like if you were to have a conversation with any of one of the cells, is in like, say, hey cell, what are you thinking? It'd be like, well, am I safe? Right? Can I run all the vital bodily processes? Right? Can I move within space to obtain resources and away from other things that might see me as a resource? And then can I perpetuate the genes? That's probably pretty much that in a nutshell.
Right.
And so not only are we safe as far as is everything functioning well, but are we safe at a mental and emotional level? And are we safe at an unconscious level and in a consciousness level? Because unfortunately, that's not always the case for a lot of people.
Right.
There's a lot of cases of depression, anxiety, especially given the current global climate. The last time I looked into this, I remember, suicide is typically double that of homicide within this country. So if we have something that's weighing us down like that, then perhaps the musculoskeletal region is going to act up, because it's all summating into the body. It's all connected, right? It's all connected, like you were saying, these slings, fascia, emergence. When we started out as one cell, like in embryo, and then we ended up with 100 trillion cells, and so it's all connected.
So that we were talking before we started recording about the ACEs, and so I want to get into that. And that reminded me of something I was cleaning, putting away Christmas on Sunday, but in the background I had on an Oprah Sunday Soul show, and I can't remember the guy's name in the book, but they just came out with a book where he talks about how the emotional effect will affect our physical body. And he made one comment about if you are at the first 2 months of life, if you feel threatened in those first 2 months of life, you have a higher risk of, and then you're safe from from 3 months on, you're safe, you're in a great environment, you're, well taken care of, everything is just perfect. There's a higher risk of negative long-term effect than somebody who for those first 2 months of life was completely taken care of and then went through trauma after that, or whatever trauma might be. And so that I find that interesting in the tie-in, and it's a book I need to go read again, but just to read in the first place. But so that kind of relates into what we're talking about with the ACEs and the different factors that feed into that. Can you dive more into, explain more about ACEs again, and how that affects our movement and where we're at?
Right. I'm just looking at my notes real quick. And so I think another way we could mention something when it comes to this is that you'll hear this sometimes, like, oh, that really made me sick to my stomach. Well, yeah, because it's all connected. Right. And so, I mean, something happened, and we're recognizing it, because within that statement, that it's not just from the neck on up as far as what we're experiencing as far as some type of upset, that like I'm also feeling it at a gut level. And we talk about embryology, and it was all one cell, and then it divided, and then it emerged. And so, yeah, at one point, the digestive system, the heart, and the brain were all connected. Like, geographically speaking, it's still connected, though. It's still connected via the fascia and via the nerves. And then there's this one term called the abdominal brain. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No, but it makes sense. That's yeah.
So let's just say if they have some food intolerance, that can influence, not just upset them within their digestive system, that can influence their mood and perhaps depression. And so going back to ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences. So it's a scale of 10 up to 10. You can have upwards of 10 adverse experiences. And I'm just looking at my notes real quick. And they've said something like this, that if you have 6 or more out of the 10, that you unfortunately perhaps can experience up to a 20-year decline in your lifespan. So let's just say if the average person is 78 or so, we're talking somewhere in their 50s. That's tragic.
That's, right. And that's from childhood experiences that, any multitude of them could be.
Right. So the formative years, the years where we're vulnerable and we're dependent upon an adult guardian. And this is just like the first, few years or so, and not to say about the other traumas that we might experience later on in life, and then perhaps in adulthood. And then that can be complex, the slings and arrows of life. So of the 10, we have the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. We have, we have physical, emotional, sexual abuse. We have physical and emotional neglect. and whatever is going on within the household, is there, someone in the household, a guardian, a family member, sibling who's mentally ill? Is there someone who has a history of incarceration, domestic violence, particularly the mother? Is there any substance abuse and divorce? So if you have a number of those, and especially 6 on up, we're at risk, statistically speaking, unfortunately. So that's ACEs. And then it can lead up to, poor behavior of the person and poor physical and mental health, and the health consequences often related with those.
And so that can appear very dire, and
there's hope, though. There's hope.
That's what I was getting to. I do believe that our prior experiences affect our current situation 100%. But I also think that we can make choices to, I don't say rectify, because you can't change what happened in the past, but you can change what happens in the future. You can change what happens today, by making addressing it, finding ways to manage it, to come. I don't know. I'm not expressing this well, but that you can get past it, that you can improve. It doesn't mean that you're going to die at 50 just because, but there is a higher risk of that in your general overall health and how it affects your general well-being.
To the degree that we're not aware and we're not managing it.
Yeah.
And then the process of healing, right? And we're not just talking physical here.
Right.
I mean, we're physical beings having a emotional and mental and perhaps spiritual experience, right? And so it's all connected. And so I believe it was Eleanor Roosevelt. She said something along the lines, she'd rather hold a candle in the dark than curse the darkness. Mm-hmm. So focus on the big panorama. There's another saying, if you have a big enough dream, you don't need a crisis. So what are the joys of life? What are the things that really provide you levity? Because there's enough gravity out there in the world. Just turn on the news, for instance.
You had made a note about gravity being unbiased, and can we manage the laws of motion? And like you said, we can't necessarily physically change those laws of motion, but on an emotional end, we potentially can, gravity can weigh us down, or we can look at the candle in the darkness and find the light and find the joy going forward.
Yeah. Can I mention someone who I feel is a great resource when it comes to this subject for the audience? Dr. Gabor Mate. If you look up him on the internet and you see his work, and then he's had a documentary in regards to this subject within the past year. It's called The Wisdom of Trauma. And Dr. Gabor Mate, an amazing human being, a psychologist, and this is a little bit of his background. If I recall correctly, his first introduction of trauma, which really helped propel him into this field, a lifelong career for him, because I think he's well into his 70s. He was born to a Hungarian mother of a Jewish cultural upbringing in Nazi Germany. So his mother was experiencing the trauma of war and genocide in Nazi-occupied Hungary. So what she was experiencing, a lot of that was being transferred onto her young infant child, that of Gabor. And so a lot of the unfortunate consequences of the trauma from that's his origin story.
Yeah.
And so you could imagine, I mean, talk about trauma.
Right. I don't know if you and I have talked about this before, but even inter-utero, or in utero, some of that trauma can carry over into the cells of the unborn child. And then that can get, that in itself is part of that childhood trauma that carries over, even though it's prior to physical birth,
whatever the mother's experiencing, the infant, right, the developing fetus is experiencing.
Yeah.
And so that is very apparent, I imagine, for a lot of people, especially mothers out there. But I feel we also experience that to a degree within the social context.
Yep.
It's part of the human experience, empathy and compassion. I mean, so I think I've heard something like this, is like the hurt of one is the hurt of all. This is a part of our humanity here.
Right. I think we look away from that when we look at our, I think there's a bigger awareness of it right now. But I do think there's a globalized, like, we are just in tune to ourselves and don't really recognize how our actions affect our neighbor, or, you across the world, or you across the United States. Like, we are all interconnected, and just by that law of frequency or frequency of vibration, and there's a vibration that goes out, and what we put out into the world comes back to us and affects the whole world. Butterfly effect almost, but
yeah. We're social beings. None of us live on an island.
Right.
I mean, that's 99% of our history too, as a species on the planet, is that we lived in intimate groups.
Yeah.
There's no other way to, as far as our survival. We wouldn't have made the journey.
And so if we tie that back into movement, how does that, how will that affect how we move, or how we function, or how our pain or limitations are, the fact that we can't get up and down from the ground, or anything along that lines? How does that tie into our physical movement as well, or how have you found that?
Say if someone's has a history of trauma, and there's a lot of stress and organ, whatever,
and maybe they're not, like, so if we are social beings and we are used to being impacts, and what we do affects other people, how, if we are losing that contact, or we are pushing other people away, whether it be because of, for whatever reason, but linking to trauma, how does that affect how we will move in the future? Or, does it affect how we are? Does the socialization affect how we move?
Well, what's coming to my mind, and I hope this does tie into your question a little bit, that if you look within the fitness community and fitness classes, a lot of times those things are pretty popular. And right. the participants that I often see participating the most within, let's just say it's a dance class, it could be a yoga class, it could be CrossFit, for instance. The majority of the participants are women, from what I've seen. And so I feel perhaps the community, the unity aspect of it can be very supportive as far as our movement. Now, imagine if someone is like really having a difficult time, that they might want to shut down and withdraw a bit. You're withdrawing from life. You're withdrawing from participating, and movement is a form of participating and interacting with our environment. It's interacting. Life is about relationships and interacting with other, with self, other, and place, for instance. And so if you're doing, in some ways, if you're not moving at all, and if you're just staying at home and you're not really engaged and participating in life, in some ways, you're experiencing sensory deprivation. And unfortunately, that is the most severe form of punishment within the corrections environment, is solitary confinement. Right. And it doesn't do us, like, a lot of times people who've been in solitary confinement for extended periods of times, it really does a number on them mentally, emotionally speaking.
Yeah.
It's not healthy. There is a time and a place where we need to kind of pull back a little bit and recharge. But as far as a long-term strategy, it's probably not the greatest thing. Right. This is kind of helping as far as some.
Yeah. And I think, so for people that I might see in a physical therapy clinic, those that have a good support system, that have grown up, and they're a little bit more aware of where they're at. I don't want to say they tend to do better, because everybody has their own space, but they may see that light a little bit better, that they can, there's going to be a better outcome on the other end, or they know they need to do the movement to be able to get back to where they want to be. They're a little bit more open to hearing about, how the digestive and the emotional and the external, like fires and whatnot, will affect how your body moves. People that are a little bit more isolated and don't have that, or that have had, that aren't open and they have a little bit more of a wall up, I think they don't do as well, in recovering and getting back into doing, whatever they want to do. And that goes into the sensory deprivation, and it goes into, they're not allowing their body to feel what they need to feel, and there's walls up. And so I guess that's how I see it in a clinic wise. And I also have a lot of people that, they want to get back into group exercise, which is the big socialization. And I've always been like, oh, just go work out on your own. But it makes sense to me, the way you say it, that, getting back in is probably an important piece, to have that total body experience, like of being in the social group and being able to experience.
And having good social connections, relationships, healthy relationships, does tie into longevity. Mm-hmm. So the people who live 80 plus some odd years, they've seen this within the blue zones within the world, right? That 9 times out of 10, they have really good social connections, relationships. And I imagine if they're healthy and vital and moving, they're up and about, that they're also moving.
Yeah.
I remember I lived in Okinawa for a number of years, and that's one of the areas in the world that's, known for being a blue zone, and seeing a lot of these seniors over there. Yeah, they were moving constantly, landscaping, farming, fishing, walking. A lot of times when you go to an Asian community, or you can see this on the internet, parks in China, you'll have people who are moving together in a community park of all ages. You'll have, people 80s on up doing Tai Chi, doing gymnastics, light form of gymnastics at times. I've seen some pretty incredible seniors out there, and you may have seen some of these clips too. It's amazing.
So how do we incorporate that, or how do we get there? If we're not there right now, how do we get there? Like we've talked about in the past, allowing yourself to explore different things, allowing the sensation, to don't be tied to necessarily one movement, go barefoot, let yourself feel the cold. I was at a Perform Better meeting of the minds, and I believe it was Brendan. Marcelo. No.
Okay.
I think it's Marcelo. He's a sleep.
Mhm.
He does a lot of work on sleep. And he was saying, how important it is for us to get a good night's sleep, to have about 20 minutes of outside, in sunlight, or, just being outside without glasses on, and allowing that, vitamin D or whatever the sunlight is to help stimulate our body. And that helps us to sleep better. And
Absolutely.
so allow, taking steps like that can help improve our overall well-being. Taking a group class if you need to, if I used to do them a lot, but lately I'm like, I don't, it's too, I don't like them because they're not that they're regimented, but you have to go at a certain time, and I can't structure that. But I tend to isolate myself if I don't do that. So maybe it's better for me to challenge myself and do that, or vice versa. If you tend to only be there, to find some time to have some quiet on your own too. So I think my point being, and how we get there, is if you're always doing something one way and you want to do something different, try something different on how you get there, I guess. But are there how else do you, or do you have some tips for recognizing where we need to change, how we can change how our body is reacting because of that old trauma or whatever? It's tying it all in.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the things that are coming to my mind is that maybe have a different relationship with working out, right? It doesn't always have to be arduous, right? Like a workout. How about a play out? How about movement snacks? How about movement vitamins? Have some play, kind of go about this, maybe not so serious, have some fun. And then, the morning light is as best as we can earlier in the day, because we're going to have more of the blue light spectrum that's going to stimulate more of the cortisol, right? So we're more awake, and focused early part of the day. And if we could do it within the first hour of awakening, and then as close to the sunrise as possible, and just go out for a walk. And then have some social time, friend, loved one, neighbor, and just, walking for like 30 minutes or so before having breakfast. I mean, that can really set us up for success, because so the daytime activities, habits will assist us within our nighttime sleep and repair. It's all tied in. It's all tied in, this whole 24-hour, 26-hour cycle, So yeah, because approximately when we get that signal from nature, from the cycles of nature, the rhythms of nature, and our own internal rhythms, and being in sync with the, nature's rhythms and our own, smaller nature rhythms, is that 10 hours or so later, it's going to set us up to have that melatonin release, and then sleep and repair. And then, what else about, you were mentioning variability of movement.
And you had a good point that we had talked about so getting outside that allows your whole autonomic system to reset, allows your digestive to go. Like if you give it bite-sized pieces of stimuli in a positive, in a not always intense, sympathetic way, but sometimes in a relaxing way, it creates that homeostasis. That's the word I was looking for, in your body, that allows for optimal movement and recovery, or just optimal movement and how we feel in general.
Yeah.
You had I don't know if you have something on that to say. One thing I was gonna go into.
You're fine.
Recovery strategies.
Yes.
Let's talk recovery strategies, because I think we all, especially right now, we're gung ho. We need to go hard, go fast, and we just push and push and push, and we skip our recovery, which is a key phase of health. So,
right. I mean, it's the key. It's key within nature too, because in the Northern Hemisphere right now, we're in the wintertime.
Yeah.
So fall and winter is synonymous with parasympathetic, with rest and repair. And then the spring and summer is more synonymous with sympathetic, more energy intensive, extensive, expending. It's a matter of economics, mm-hmm. right? I can only make so many withdrawals. Eventually I'll have to make some deposits. Right. And so working out is going to be a stressor. It's going to be taking a little bit more resources. It's a little bit more sympathetic nervous system dominant, fight, flight, freeze, right? But ideally, if I want to adapt well, I need that recovery aspect. I need checks and balances. And so that's where, mental, emotional, stress management comes in. That's where like mindful breathing comes in, healthy interactions, relationships, friend, family, loved one, your pet, for instance, having some introspective time, maybe even meditation, nutrition, food, healthy food, right? Speaks to the genes, helps with optimal gene expression. Life gives life, life eats life, right? And so the more vital something was, food, right? At one point it was alive. And essentially it's giving its life in service to your life. And maybe we can also kind of have a different aspect as far as how we're approaching food too. Perhaps something more that of a place of reverence. It's not just, it's not like we're just throwing gas into a gas tank here, right? This is in most cases something that was alive. I mean, so how sacred is that? And then sleep, restoration. Sleep is on as far as the way I look at it, sleep is essentially a nutrient. If I don't have sufficient sleep after a couple of days, I start to break down. And according to the World Health Organization, people who are sleep deprived, sleep deficient, chronically, we could say something like 6 hours or less on average. Ideally, we want 7, 9, and that's sleep, not just being in bed, because you can be in bed for 9 hours, but you could be awake for 2 of those. And so I'm looking at the net and the quality and the many phases of sleep as well. And another vitamin, sleep is a vitamin and nutrient of sorts, helps with growth hormone release, and that's where our immune system is most active. But another vitamin to consider is that of nature. They've seen in studies that people who have a view of nature in a hospital environment are much quicker to heal than those who don't have a view of nature. And there's this aspect called biophilia, love of life, love of nature. And the person who came up with that in the 80s, former Harvard social biologist, E.O. Wilson, who just recently passed away in late December, and he was well into his 90s. And you can look him up. And his book, he also had a book called Biophilia. And air is a chief nutrient. 3 minutes without it, life ceased to exist. So being mindful of our breathing. And so these are just a few low-hanging fruit items to be mindful of. And to the point that we're not mindful of, then we're probably not able to manage these things as well.
So to recap that for my cheer parents and former cheerleaders that are now sitting at a desk all day long or driving your kids to competition and sitting in a big convention hall, that's good because you're getting on that social end. Get out and move around. There's ways to do that. Make sure you are giving yourself the vitamin of getting enough sleep beforehand. We tend to, I remember myself in competition time, like you were going all day, working, all afternoon, and then hanging out with friends at night. So sleep was minimal, and that was a detriment. And so training our kids as adults that they need to get their rest, they're not going to want to hear it because that's kids, but training them to good sleep habits by getting outside in the morning, getting some fresh air to help with the oxygen exchange, practicing some breathing techniques, which is helpful on the mindful end, but also helpful on strengthening your core and strengthening and just improving your oxygen exchange to help your vitality in general. Tuning into what you're eating and then get outside and experience nature so that you are not just in a car driving to work, sitting in a convention hall, sitting on a computer all day long. Like you don't have to do hours and hours and days of it, but do that over the lifespan so you get little bits of it and take those little pieces of it. And that goes for everybody, but that's, like incorporating that into our everyday life and like learning how to manage our body outside of just the physical hardcore exercise, I think is important. It's something we all miss.
Yeah. Do the simple things savagely well.
That's great. That's great.
and that's actually Mark Verstegen, the founder of Exos.
Yeah.
I remember hearing him say that within the first hour, the first day of a mentorship years ago. It was then Athletes Performance, now Exos. Yeah. And when he said that, do this simple thing savagely well, I would say that's money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I say something real quick too?
Yeah. Yep.
So for those people out there who are 35 plus, to just consider that. I think we were talking in the pre-interview is that aging and the way we live or don't live, these are universals. And so these are equalizers. And so to be aware of the big picture and manage this stuff as best as possible. And so if we're a summation of these many cells and bodily processes, and if we're just looking at the muscles, for instance, consider the panorama. And at a cellular process, if you're familiar with this, Laura, that if you take the coenzyme, the molecule NAD plus, for instance, right, which has a lot to do with cellular function and mitochondrial function and telomeres and gene stability, for instance, right? We're just talking about one coenzyme molecule, for instance, right? But there's a whole myriad of them as well that are doing similar things. So for instance, if we look at NAD plus, on average, around the age 40 or so, it's at 50% of what it once was at our biological peak. And that continues to decline 50% again every 20 years. And so this is so significant that even the military is looking into this. I think they're looking into this as of last October for at least 6 months, and particularly within their special forces community. So they're having those members within that community supplement with NAD plus, because they're looking to further the performance and longevity of those people, because most people in the special forces are seasoned military personnel, but they start to decline in performance, their effectiveness in their 30s, mid 30s, late 30s. So the military, the government is looking to prolong that as best as they can, because they're wanting to get the best return on their investment. And so the military is investing, I want to say, several million, if not billions of dollars into this. And they're not going to do that just for any old reason, are they?
Right.
So imagine, apply that to the general person.
So they're using a supplement for NADA?
It's an NAD plus. NAD plus is this coenzyme molecule, and they're having this community take a supplement, and they're wanting to see how it's going to help improve the outcomes. Yeah, you could look this up. Look up special forces and NAD plus, and you'll see. So NAD plus within ourselves naturally can be improved by way of exercise, by way of stress management, by way of sleep, by way of nutrient dense foods, by way of intermittent fasting. Right. So it's naturally occurring. It can be naturally supported. I would say supplements are supplemental. Right. Food first and behavior first and foremost.
Right. Yeah, that was my question, is can we influence the NAD plus on our own? Sometimes you do need to have a supplement to supplement what you're doing, but like you said, get your nutrients from your food sources first, and your movement and all that stuff.
And we can also have addition through subtraction, right? Minimize the toxins, right? Whether that's your environment, whether that's your relationships, whether that is actual substances that we're ingesting. Minimize the toxins. So take away the negatives, and then I think that we can get a lot just by that alone.
Yeah.
And then optimize our digestive system, because you can have the best nutrient intake as possible, but if we don't have a good digestive system to make and utilize and get the most of it, then it's kind of going in and out and not much happening in between.
Right. We're meant to eat and get our nutrition to give us fuel and optimize our body, and it needs to process the right way. If things aren't going the right way and we're not getting those nutrients and getting absorbed, then it will not create optimal body function in general. So digestion is a heavy parasympathetic process. Mm-hmm. So the more parasympathetic tone that we have and minimize the stress, we're going to aid our digestion. Yeah, that's right. Try to, we were talking earlier about, how do I address this in clinic and whatnot? And, I try to, and it's my aim is to address the whole body and how it affects everything. Where I'm going with this is, one big exercise that I give a lot is breathing exercise. And people are like, I breathe all the time and I breathe, and this makes me feel like meditation. And most of the time I use breathing a lot for core stability. So I'm using it on a semi-sympathetic way to promote stability, but really in doing that, breathing is a big way to influence the parasympathetic system, like checking in with our breath, learning how to breathe properly. Our breathing will change from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic state and vice versa, depending on what we're doing. If we're running, it needs to be different than if we're digesting. But learning how to do that and learning how to train ourselves from being in that parasympathetic breathing state is key. And this just gave me great, this is just reminding me of how to explain that to my clients when we're talking about things like reflux, which is a symptom of the digestive system not working more optimally, or constipation, or hemorrhoids and other things like that can potentially be affected by that parasympathetic sympathetic state. And just the act of focusing on your breathing for a couple minutes a day intermittently can greatly help that. May not fix it completely. There's other things that are involved because we are a whole system, but so thank you for reminding me of that.
No, thank you. I mean, and then breathing is movement, right?
Yeah.
If you stop breathing, you stop moving.
Right.
In the hospital, they call that flatline.
Yeah.
Right. And then within a PT context, let's just say someone's having some low back pain. We can shift our focus of our senses, our eyes, our smell, our breathing. We can do some skin stimulation on the area and just rub it. These are all sensory inputs. We can move all the other joints that aren't, aggravated at the time. So move that, move where you're successful. And just these things, a handful or so of low hanging fruit can really shift the sensory input and experience of one's pain. So like pain, if I remember right, and then, correct me, pain is an output of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if we change the inputs, we can help change the outputs as far as what we're experiencing. And breathing, that's an input.
Yes. Last kind of addition into that, and then we'll wrap up. One of my morning meditation videos that I was watching today with Bob Proctor, he talked about the vibration and the vibration we put out, and that we tend to only think of our five senses, the smell, the touch, the taste, the sound, and the sight, and the visual, but our bodies are, there's a big influence from the vibrational aspects in the world that is more, maybe it's a sixth sense. I don't know. He didn't label it, but that what we believe is going to happen is what is going to happen, or what we think about is where we attract and what we are going to get. So what we put out into the world is what we're going to get back into the world. And so being looking for that light in the world, putting out the positive, thinking that, changing our mindset that things are going to be okay if you have an injury or you've gone through some bad trauma, like finding the positive and knowing that that's there for you, and will attract more of that for you and will help in the healing process. So believing that you're going to get better is a big way to help yourself get better. And yeah, you may have to do work, but knowing that work is worth the effort is worth it all. Yeah.
And with breathing, once again, you were mentioning vibration.
Mhm.
A lot of times people might sigh or hum or chant, toning, for instance. That vibrates the vocal cords, which helps to stimulate the vagus nerve. So the restorative branch of the nervous system, once again. And like you said, like, hell, if we're going to exercise any one muscle, let's start with I would say the one between our ears and also the one in the middle of our chest.
Yep.
Right. This heart mind connection, mind body connection.
Yep.
And heaven and hell, but for many of us, I would say, exists between our ears.
Yep.
What do you want to experience more of?
Yep.
Because like I said earlier, unfortunately, turn on the news, we have plenty of that. So let's have a little bit more of the other.
Yeah.
Have a little bit more heaven, less hell.
Doesn't know, and it can mean removing some of the negative by turning off the TV or turning off the news or turning, and that allowing yourself to turn up the heaven, allowing the volume to turn up a little bit there.
The news is an oxymoron. I really feel it's the old, unfortunate, timeless, universal behavior of our species being played out over, and it's like Groundhog Day.
Yep. 100% it is.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on again. And I know we'll do this again another time. You always help me to think in a different perspective. And I hope hope everybody else gets a different takeaway today that they can incorporate into their everyday life. I appreciate your coming on. And everybody, my words of advice, don't forget, when in doubt, breathe out and take it one step at a time. And something that I'm starting to remind people of, from my friend Drew Keller, who recently passed away. He left us with an awesome quote that you are responsible for your own vibes. And so bring the vibes that you want to the party and to the game. And that ties greatly into what we just talked about today. Have a great day, and I will talk to you next time.